the start that. Um, so picking up kind of where we left off last week, as we talked about, we were talking about continuing to talk about the problem of young adults leaving the church, walking away. We talked last week, last couple of weeks about Romans 14, 15. We also had some conversation last week about some experiences that some of us have had in church and from people who are a part of the church. I've been thinking about that a lot this week. I've also gotten some calls from people this week, just along the lines of from that was hard to hear to are you okay hearing that? Just various responses to that. And I guess I wanted to start just a little bit by saying that we need to have conversations like that sometimes. It's not easy to hear, but it's important sometimes that we have those kind of tough conversations, that we hear the experiences of people. It's easy to just sort of get into this, this sort of reality of thinking that, well, our church is loving, our church is friendly, our church is, because we intend for it to be, but intention doesn't always get us there. And sometimes we have to really take looks at ourselves, and we have to be, honest about what we see, and that maybe not everybody is experiencing the things that we think people are experiencing in church. And that's kind of part of the theme of this whole series of study that we're on. Not everybody is experiencing what we maybe even intend for them to be experiencing, what we would want them to be experiencing. I don't think most people at most churches are setting out to drive people away. I think just very often what happens is we fall into these patterns and habits that we don't question and that we don't take hard looks at, and just continue doing what we do because that's what we've always done, and thinking somehow that the outcome will be what we intend. So I just wanted to say up top here, I'm thankful, not that these things happen to people, but that people were willing to talk about them and say, here's what happened, here's my experience, and here's the way I took that. And I think that's an important thing too. People don't always take away from interactions what we intend. And things that are done maybe at the time we think out of love don't always come across that way. And we've got to be able to hear that and listen when somebody says that, and recognize that we don't always get it right. And we have to be able to hear when people say, I don't think you get it right here. At least I didn't take it that way. I didn't take this as love. I didn't take this comment. I didn't take this suggestion. I didn't take this statement. I didn't take it as you showing love to me. I took it as something else. One of the basic things I was taught about communication is it doesn't happen unless the receiver, the person receiving the message, understands and gets what the person sending the message intends for them to get. There's no communication there. It's broken down. The person who sends the message can say, well, that's not what I intended, and they need to take it differently, and they don't need to listen that way, and they don't need to hear it that way. And you'd say that all you want. You didn't communicate. And so as we talk about these things, I mean, that's what we talked about last week, and some of the things that were said are right in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about here, what we're discussing. People aren't always getting from church what we want them to get, what we think they should get, what we can't understand any other way. People aren't necessarily getting that. And so that's the reason we have to be willing to listen and hear and change where necessary. So that's what I wanted to say about all that at the beginning. Other comments, other thoughts related to that, or anything else that you wanted to bring up? All right, then. If not, what I thought we would do tonight is start sort of turning back toward some of these, some of the responses that these surveys that were received in these surveys as to why young adults have walked away from church. And I want to start talking about maybe some sort of positive things we can do to address those issues and respond to those issues. And response might look a lot of different ways, right? We can respond by saying, hey, you're dead right about this. We need to change. We can respond by saying, well, here's what we intended. Let's talk about what we intended and talk about better ways to communicate that going forward, better ways to address some of these issues that are going forward. Sometimes we may just find that there's going to be a disconnect there that we can't necessarily get past, but we need to start thinking about how do we respond as to some of these statements, some of these reasons that young adults have given for walking away from church. I'll just say kindly, if you don't think that we need to respond to these, then this is probably going to be the wrong class for you for the next few weeks, because this is what we're going to be thinking about. We're going to be thinking about how do we look at this, look at this data and respond to it. So fair enough. That's where we're going to go the next few weeks. And the first one I wanted to look at is the first reason we talked about that young adults tend to give. Churches seem overprotective. Do you remember us talking about that reason that churches seem overprotective? You guys remember us talking about that? No,
yes, we talked about it.
I remember.
Okay, so what does that mean? What are these folks who have walked away or are in the process of walking away perhaps, or have stayed in spite of, what are they saying when they say they feel that churches are overprotective?
It seems to me they're saying they wanted more freedom to do what they want to do.
Okay.
I think it comes down to people that have a lot of experience versus people that don't, living the Christian life. And there's a lot of pitfalls out there. We all know it. We see them more and more as we get older, and things that can just ruin your faith, pull you down. And maybe the younger person can't see that yet. So.
How do we get experience?
Doing it wrong.
What's that, Josh?
Doing it wrong.
Sometimes by doing it right. I know I've gotten a lot of experience by doing it wrong sometimes, right? We get experience by doing, by trying things on, by dealing with the outcomes of those things. We get experience in. Hello.
What are they saying? Are they saying that being raised by Christian parents, being raised going to church on a weekly basis, sometimes more than once, that somehow they're not equipped when they go out into the world away from home, and that when they do get out there, whether they go to school or they're going to work or whatever it might be, that they don't know how to handle it because nobody ever addressed this issue, and they're not prepared to deal with it, and they kind of they're holding that against the church for some reason. That oh, somebody should have told me that this is what people are really like, or this is what I'm going to encounter out there, and nobody ever told me about that. Is that what they're saying?
So it feels like some of the comments or some of the ways of talking about this, and it goes in different directions. Some of it has to do with this phrase that just really struck me. Much of their experience of Christianity feels stifling, fear-based, and risk-averse. That we look out at the world around us and we're scared of everything. And we're afraid of, what might happen. We're afraid of losing our faith. We're afraid of moral compromise. We're afraid of persecution. We're afraid of, any number of things. And so because of that, their experience has been that the church is trying to sort of keep them in this bubble, encouraging them to stay within this bubble, and not take the chance of bumping up against some of these issues. You get about 25% of the group saying that Christians demonize everything outside the church. So everything outside the church is evil, it's wrong, it's bad, and there's all bad out there. And you just gotta be careful and try to hang in there till Wednesday night Bible class and then Sunday worship. You just got to try to sort of get through the week until you can limp along into the next church assembly. There were some things. 22% said that the church ignores problems of the real world, that there's real world issues that the church isn't dealing with at all, just ignoring completely. There was the concern about pop culture, movies, music, video games being harmful. 18% said that had been their experience, and that was one of the things that had turned them off. And it's let me hasten to add, it's not I would play Grand Theft Auto and my church won't let me. It's the idea is, why am I so afraid of? Why is the church so afraid of the culture around us? Why do we feel so at odds with it?
So I don't know if this is an answer, but it does suggest it validates the problem to some extent. The Amish have this thing called Rumspringa. When you're a teenager at some age, the Amish just say, look, we're going to throw you out. You can go into the world. You do not have to follow our rules. And Amish kids do that. And whether that's right or wrong, it does seem to recognize that there's this point of growth where people need to find out for themselves about stuff. And yes, they make mistakes.
Yeah.
And the point from the Amish tradition has always been sort of like our approach to baptism, maybe, which is if you're going to adopt this lifestyle, we want you to make an informed choice. And so you do need to see what the world is like out there and maybe make some mistakes and the like. And then when you decide you want to come back to the community, and they have a pretty good rate of return, you won't be able to say that we deceived you or you didn't understand what the options were. Now, you might say that anyway, but still, nonetheless, there's this recognition of there is a phase of life here where we've got to let a little bit more loose about stuff. And I don't think in a lot of churches that room is given. I mean, when you're a teenager, you think you know everything. I mean, and we just have to recognize, even if we know they don't, they're going to think they do, right? And they need to experiment, maybe some. So anyway, I'll toss it out there just as some group that does seem to recognize, and it's not like it's a tolerant group, or not a orthodox kind of group, but that nonetheless they recognize it. It really literally means in German or Pennsylvania Dutch, running around, and they've just institutionalized that this issue. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it is an interesting sort of example of trying to deal with this exact thing. How do we recognize this? Do you remember? I mean, I can remember when I was 18, 19, 20, 21. It's not like I was, trying to find excuses to go out and, rob liquor stores. And I wasn't, but I didn't want, I mean, and the world was out there, right? It was in front of me. I wanted to go and see what was happening, and see what was out there. And I knew what my faith told me, and I knew, I had been taught what it is to live as a Christian. I knew those things, but I also wanted to go and we all, I think, to some degree or the other, we go to college, we go out into the world, and we want to work and start a career, and a faith that says those things are suspect at best is not a faith that encourages us to experience the world and figure out how to live our faith within that experience. Does that make, I don't know if I said that well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Patrick, it's Christy.
Yeah, Kristen.
I think we have to acknowledge that it's developmentally appropriate as people are becoming adults to be finding their own way. And what I'm not sure I think we latch down a bit. We secure the fortresses a bit more than we should, because either they're gonna, anyway, it's developmentally appropriate, but we still are in that mode of thinking we have to give them all the answers. And they see at kindergarten, that's fine. At 16, they see right through us. And we don't actually have all the answers, in my opinion. So I would rather show them the struggles that we're having as adults to agree on some of these things. I think that's more realistic. Yeah. But we're not all that good at struggling with those issues together as adults. So I don't think they see, that's where I think we get to the, oversimplification of the thing. And if we don't allow that conversation, that's when it's like, well, they're overprotective. They just want to give us all the answers.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that's the tendency. And it's when we do it, why do we do it? Well, to some degree or the other, we do it out of love. We do it because we're concerned. We do it because we care. We do it because we don't want to lose them. We do it because it makes us uncomfortable to think of losing them. We do it for us sometimes as much as we do it for them, perhaps. But I mean, our motives are mixed. But at least mixed in there is some love and some desire to protect and of course that's, when a kid's 12, that's very appropriate. When a kid's 22, it's probably less so, right? There's probably less appropriateness there, and we got to recognize that this is part of development, as you said. I want to take a minute, and I want us to think about, as Christians, our attitude toward the world. And that's a phrase. It's honestly a phrase that preaching, I try not to use too much, because I think our understanding, now that's a biblical phrase, the world, but I think our understanding of it sometimes makes it sound like we're antagonistic toward everybody out there. And I don't, I don't like to get into this habit of referring to the world, intoning the world and these, this scary voice. Because the Bible doesn't really have that view of the world either. A couple of interesting passages that kind of came to mind, and that I was looking through and thinking about this in Galatians 6:14. Paul writes, "May I never boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world." And if that was the only verse about the world in Scripture, we would probably have a very negative outlook toward the world, right? The world is something to split from, to be divorced from entirely. The world is something to be separated from, like in a death and a crucifixion. James 4, "You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God?" So we have these passages, and there are others like them. We have these passages in the Bible that sort of give us this sense that there is something about the world, that phrase, that for a Christian, we have to divorce from. We have to be separated from. But as you start looking at that and thinking through that, you start to realize that it's certainly that what Paul's talking about is certainly not by the world. He doesn't necessarily mean by the world. James doesn't necessarily mean everything outside the church. And that's, I think, the struggle we sometimes get in with our young adults. 1 John 2:15 through 17 talks about love for the world, and then explains it as the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And the interesting thing to me about that is that in 1 John, the problem with the world doesn't seem to be so much the world as it is the way we receive the world, right? The lust of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It's what you want. It's what you see and are attracted to. It's the pride that makes you want to grab onto these things and hold them tightly and find your security and your peace in them. We're not talking about the people of the world. We're talking about the values, some of the values of the world. We're talking about some of the ways the world says to be successful, some of the ways the world says to find security and to find peace and to find hope. And so sometimes as a Christian, we have to do things that separate us from the world in that regard. We take care of the poor. We take care of the of those in need, those who are on the margins, precisely because the world says they don't matter so much. And it's not just the people out there. It's not just the circumstances that we find ourselves in. It's the ways in which we receive those and internalize them. Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 talks about, I'm going to turn there so I get it right. He talks about using the things of the world. And it's an interesting passage there. It's largely in the context of marriage and sexual relationships, and he's sort of straddling the line there by saying, it's necessary for some people to get married, and that's okay. It's probably better if you don't in some ways. That he's got this sort of back and forth. He says in verse 29, "What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away." So Paul acknowledges a couple of things there. He acknowledges, first of all, that there are things in the world, and by things I mean people and situations and possessions, and there are aspects of the world that as Christians we will experience, and we can experience those things, and we don't have to be afraid of experiencing those things. But we're not engrossed in them. We don't think that they're going to last forever. We don't have our hope set on those things. We can let go of them as easily as we grab onto. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that or talking about that in a fair way? What do you guys think?
I think this ties in with what we've been saying about overprotectiveness. I think that we do have to know and understand the things of the world if we're to educate young Christians about our faith. I feel a responsibility to I wouldn't feel comfortable condemning something as sinful if I didn't understand it. And if I didn't feel that I knew the complexities of the situation. I just as an example, this isn't my conviction, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with it. I see so many Christians who oppose evolution vehemently, don't want it taught in schools. That there's nothing wrong with that. That's not what I believe. But I would see nothing wrong with that if those same Christians made an effort to understand evolution and not keep to know what the theory actually said, and not keep repeating lies that they've heard about it, and lies, misconceptions, whatever you want to call them. If there was that effort to say, okay, I believe this is a dangerous idea that I don't want my children to believe in, that I don't want other young people in the church to believe in, let me do as much research as I can to understand this, so I know how to refute it, so I know how to argue against it. I don't see, and the same thing happens with various aspects of pop culture as well. You know, the moment a movie gets threaded as well, it's violent. How is it violent? What happens in it that could lead someone to sin? No, you're just going to, you heard it was violent online somewhere, so you're going to campaign against it. Or, you know, a film like Last Temptation of Christ, which just got this stigma that, appropriately enough, it was stigmatized as heretical, without just so many people just leapt to that conclusion and were protesting this film in droves, without ever taking a moment to consider the context of what happens in that film. And, you know, I'm not saying, you know, anything in that film is right or wrong. I'm just, I think there's this jumping to conclusions, and there's not this desire. That's what I think is missing for me with a lot of the prominent voices in Christianity. And I think that's why this this label of overprotective gets put on the church, because there's no desire to understand. There's no desire to come to people where they are and see their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the ways to talk about it is that perhaps sometimes we have got this idea that faith in some way or the other requires an abandonment of the world, or, you know, I think of Paul in 1 Corinthians, yeah, First Corinthians talking about, I told you to avoid the sexually immoral, and the, he lists a bunch of categories, and he says, I didn't mean the people out there. I meant the people in here, the people who should know better. The people out there, if you're avoiding all these categories of sin out there, you're going to have to go out of the world entirely. And Paul implies, I don't want that. I don't want you going out of the world. I want you being there. I want you present in the world, not to experience, to share in its excesses, but to be, as Jesus talked about, salt and light. It's tough to be salt and light when you're hiding under a bushel, right? It's tough to be salt and light when you've lost your saltiness. And so we're going to be different. We need to be different, but we need to be different there, not, hiding in our cloisters. And I don't think most of the time the church is actively saying, well, everybody hide, but we can sort of give the impression that the world equals bad, church equals good. So let's just all sort of stay clumped together and try to avoid out there as much as we can. Jesus didn't do that. What's John 3:16 say? You didn't know there'd be a memory verse tonight, did you? What's John 3:16?
For God so loved the world.
The world, that he gave his one and only son. Verse 17, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Verse 19, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. People didn't always like it, right? People didn't always love Jesus, didn't always respond to him, but he was in the world. He was there. He was among people, rubbing elbows with folks, whether good, whether bad. And I think that perhaps in our concern with protecting, at times we might have been guilty of discouraging young adults from going into the world as Jesus did. And that's an important distinction. I don't think we ought to encourage our kids to go into the world and do anything they want to do. I don't think we ought to encourage our young adults to go into the world and do everything they want. I mean, they're going to do what they want, right? But I don't think we ought to encourage that. But I do think we ought to encourage them to be in the world and give them some tools to be in the world in the way Jesus was in the world.
Patrick?
Yeah.
So I've heard people who struggle with staying in the church, and not just young people, older folks too, sometimes say, when I was growing up, I was taught that, the good were in the church. And if you weren't in the church, you were in, amongst the sinners. But I've met a lot of really kind, loving people who will go way out of their way to be loving to people who don't deserve it, who aren't going to church. And I've seen a lot of stuff in church that doesn't seem too loving as I'm growing up. Now, I'm not saying in any particular church, because we're not mean to each other, but they see things that to them are more, if they see gossip, or if they see it can be some of those subtle sins that we're guilty of. And so that's why this overprotective, we're the good and they're not, becomes a fallacy as they start to see these nuances. And I think that may be to some extent why this comes about. We don't, anyway.
One of the suggestions I have is just very simply, we need to teach people, young adults, kids, older, everybody, we need to be teaching each other in the church. There is good in the world. There is good out there. There is beauty out there. There are lovely things in the world. There are lovely people in the world. And we need to make sure that message is getting through. because the caricature that sometimes gets through is what you just said, right? Everything out there is bad and we need to avoid. I don't think anybody's trying to say everything and everybody out there is bad, but that's the message that can get through when we fail to recognize and say there is beauty out there. God created the world.
I would even argue that can be of God.
Yeah,
working
oh,
in
absolutely,
someone.
absolutely.
That
It is
can
of
be
God.
working
Yeah.
in the non-Christian. We don't know God's plan for that person. Maybe that is how that person is going to know Jesus down the road. And
Absolutely.
who am I to say, nope, you got to be in my pew to be God's accepted one. It's my opinion.
I think you're right. I mean, we believe that's Bible, isn't it? That everything good comes from God. I mean, that's biblical. That's a biblical statement. Everything good comes from God. If you see good out there, that's God. You know, that's something from God. That's a gift from Him. And if you see it in a person, whether they're a Christian or not, that's a gift from God. That's something beautiful from Him. And I think one of the important things that we've got to get across to folks, and this, I say this personally because this got through to me when I was a teenager, young adult. I don't know if it was my mom or dad, my church, some of both, but one of the things that got through to me is, you know, the world can be a pretty cool place. There's some wonderful things out there. There's some wonderful things to see and do and experience and share with others. And I do think that is a gift of God, and it's a mark of the fact that it's His creation. And I think we need to get that across a little better than sometimes we do, because otherwise the caricature gets through.
But
what we're saying is everything's bad.
But the problem here is that we want to draw the lines as to where healthy enjoyment of the world is fine and where it's not fine anymore. And those lines have shifted over the years. So, for example, my mom couldn't play cards, right? Now, I don't know a men's retreat in which there wasn't a card game going.
No, surely not.
Surely not. Yeah, exactly. And she couldn't go to movies, right? And I think so I'll just throw out an example. There are tougher issues, but I will throw out an example. You talk to teens much right now, and you're going to quickly discover that smoking, drinking, vaping, and using marijuana, which is now legal, at least for certain age groups in Illinois, are quickly going to come up. And, you know, they're going to be challenging a person who's talking with them. And they're going to say, you know, I think there's some good things about this. And they're going to want to know, do you want me to still be coming to church if I'm going to be trying to make up my own mind about some of these things? And I think far too often the impression, if not the direct answer they get, is no, because you're a sinner and you're not repenting. And so, you know, flee the evil one, kind of thing. And I don't know what people think about those things. I think a lot of those things are unwise, but I also question whether or not we have the right to decide for them. And again, they're trying to find things out for themselves. And if, you know, I just think we have to be a little looser in our grip on things, keeping them in the fold, but maybe a little further away from the center at times might be a better strategy than putting them outside the gates here, because they may then come back towards the center at some point. Anyway, so I've put out some examples. There are tougher ones, but I'm not sure we fully even resolved those as to how to approach them if a teen is honest and says, I just don't see any problem with this. It's legal and this, that, and the other.
Or at least have a discussion where we really have to defend why we think it's wrong.
Yeah, or I mean, yeah, I again, I don't want to. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that we now again, there is a moral code, for lack of a better word, for Christianity. There is a way that we are to walk that echoes Jesus, that copies him, that imitates him to the best of our ability. But we don't always have all the answers about that. And again, I think even if we disagree with some of our teenagers, some of our young adults about certain things, even if we kind of like, really this, I think we can have those conversations. I think we can do it, should be able to do it in with kindness, with compassion, with the understanding that, as you're talking about, that I mean, you get out there and you try things. You're trying stuff on. You're with friends who are trying stuff on, and it's not always easy to make those calls, and it's not always easy to make those decisions. And if we can just be aware of that, even if we don't agree with it, even if we're not okay with it, to be able to make those have those conversations and understand that we need to be offering a place for searchers, people who are trying to find the Lord, to come and do so wherever they are. And whether those are our young adults who have sort of wandered off this direction after something shiny, or whether it's brand new Christians coming in for the first time who maybe don't have everything all straightened out yet, we need to be a place where people feel like that they can find some answers and find their way without somebody trying to put a gate in front of them. Following Jesus, right? Jesus is the gate. Jesus is the one that determines what the gate is. We are fellow disciples. One of the things that I really do think is an issue for our young adults, and it kind of comes in between the lines. I think one of the issues is, like, I've got friends that aren't Christians. They do things sometimes that, my church would frown on. But I don't want to have to break off ties with them. I don't want to have to separate from them. So how do I manage that? And it seems that sometimes the way they're managing it is to walk away from church. One of the things I think I'm going to start doing with our teenagers, play me a song that you like. Everybody carries around, phones with them, right? With music on it. Play me a song that you like. I'm going to have a few minor rules in place, because we are talking about teenagers, not adults. I'm going to have a few rules in place, but play me a song that you like. I want to hear the music that you want to hear. I may also ask if I can play them a song that I like. But I think, little things like that maybe can go a long way toward that. Now, why do you like that? What is it about that speaks to you, that you appreciate, that touches you in some way? What is it about that you like? I think that'll be kind of an interesting practice, and maybe lead to some interesting conversations. I hope. One of the issues that we deal with, we see in the New Testament, biblical texts about new creation. And again, sometimes we have the idea that new creation means, everything out there has to just get wiped out in a fireball. The new creation texts in the Bible, I think almost bar none, when new creation is mentioned, it is positive, not negative. It is hopeful, not despairing. New creation means God is going to take away the things that cause sin and death and pain and hatred, and those are going to be gone. And in its place is creation as God intended it to be all along. That's a
Patrick,
positive thing.
Patrick, I just
Yeah.
want to go back to something that you said
Yeah.
just about friends. I think we got to realize that most of the teens who are coming to this church, most of the teens that are coming to most churches of Christ, it's not like they're going to have a lot of church peers in their school or in their neighborhood even, right? And unfortunately, that's not the way we're organized these days. We're not a parish neighborhood kind of church generally. We're not that numerous oftentimes. And I mean, I can just say from my own kids' experience, friends are so important to people at this time. And that peer pressure, sometimes even just the nastiness that kids inflict on others, and they won't even tell you about some of the pressures and stuff they're going through at the time. Again, this is just one of the reasons why we've got to give people a little bit of room here, because to ask them to reject that peer pressure and just be a loner, some may be able to do that. But for many, it's a huge ask, and it'll drive them out. I mean, it just will. And again, just some room here. And again, let them get through this and develop the maturity. And then, I mean, it's all well and good. I'm not saying with all of these things, it's fair to give warnings. It's fair to give advice. You love them. We all love them. We're trying to do the best for them, but we're not really in their shoes. We don't always know what they're facing out there. And we think it's all well and good, but it's not always. They've got a lot of things going on that they're balancing, moving from childhood to adulthood. And they don't tell us everything.
One of the things you said about asking them to be loners, asking them to reject, to disconnect from some of these relationships and just stand all on their own. I mean, there are times as Christians where we have to do that for sure, but we got to give them resources. We can't just say you got to do that and then not help them, not encourage them, and not recognize that there will be times when that is too big a move and they just can't manage it at that moment in time. And we got to be there for them then too. And let them know that our love for them has not changed and God's love for them has not changed. One of the things we've got to teach, and it's getting undermined in every direction, one of the things we've got to teach is you have great value. You have value in yourself far beyond the opinions and the expectations of other people. That you have value, and we see it. We know what it is. We recognize that value just like you are, just the way you look, just the way you dress, just you've got great value, and that message gets undermined in the lives of teenagers and young adults from every direction all the time. And when they're hearing they have value, it is not always from Christians. And we need to make sure it's from Christians.
I was thinking about the sins we've been talking about, and I would like to hope that we can make as much of an emphasis in discussing sins that it's not just the sex, drugs, and rock and roll we're talking about, but greed, selfishness, gossip, pride, all those things that we all still struggle with. I mean, it's easy for me to talk about, the sin of some of these things when I'm not they're not things I'm struggling with, so it's easy for me to call those out, but I would like us to emphasize those other things. And what you're talking about is the real Christian message, which is you matter no matter what someone says. And that is why it's why all the sins matter, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. Yeah.
not just
right.
the ones that we like to attribute to teenagers.
That's right. That's right. Well said. Well, we need to wind up tonight. I've kept you late, and I've been told that I should not keep you so late. I'll let you guess who's told me that. We will wind up for tonight. But I thank you so much for your comments and for your patience and for your listening. And next week we will continue sort of looking at some of these reasons given by young adults and how maybe we can respond in positive ways. Next week we'll be looking at the reason that some young adults have given that their experience of Christianity is just shallow. What does that mean? That their experience is shallow, and how do we as the church try to communicate something deeper and broader so that's where we'll pick up next week. Thank you very much. Hope you guys have a great week. Good night,
Good night.
Darlene.
Hi, everyone.
Night,
Good
Richard.
night for you, Diana and everyone.
All right. Take care, Darlena. Thank you. We'll
Good
pray for
night,
you.
guys. Good night, Christy.
Guys have a really good week.